Black women remain subjects who must recite power to have any power, even though the power of the reciter is never the power of the subject who originates the lines to be recited.
Some people aren't going to like you. I remember thinking like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to stand up in front of an audience and be like, I command you to whatever.
Oh, well, you had to be there. No, I didn't, because that's why we invented stories. So I, in fact, didn't gotta be there.
What's up, rhetoric nerds? Welcome back to Rhetorically Speaking, a podcast committed to banishing banality one speech at a time. I am, of course, your hostess with the mostess, rhetoric professor Lee Pierce, she, they pronouns. For those of you new to the podcast, I study rhetoric, which is the thing that you're doing when you are saying words that create realities. You rhetoric when you do the big stuff, like pass or block legislation in Congress, and when you do the small stuff, like use or do not use the inclusive singular they pronoun, of which I am a big fan. You have likely heard rhetoric used as a synonym for empty talk or bullshit, as in the president's rhetoric, but really, it's all rhetoric. Speaking of presidents, hopefully everyone had a chance to watch or listen to at least some of the 2021 U.S. presidential inauguration, where not one, but two Black women took the stage to speak. One of these women was our new VP, Kamala Harris, and the other was Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman, who delivered her poem, The Hill We Climb, to smashing fucking success. White folks loved it, black folks loved it, multiracial folks loved it, Trump probably hated it. All hail Amanda Gorman, who has now made history as the youngest ever inaugural poet. The only person who seemed not to like the poem was Irish critic Melanie McDonough of The Spectator. More on her later, and me. I know, but don't worry, it gets better. My response was just kind of meh. After all, they didn't give her much to work with. The inauguration theme was unity, and Gorman gave us a poem about unity. She did the best she could. It wasn't Def Poetry Jam, but I'm a cliche critic. That's what I notice. And at a presidential election, whose theme is unity, and who is terrified of alienating what's left of the political moderates, I did not have high hopes. In fact, confession, I sat down to write this episode as an analysis of how cliche Gorman's poem was. Not to be clear, not because I have like an axe to grind. I mean, she's half my age with half my privilege, and I have a podcast with 100 listeners, and she has a best-selling book on Amazon that doesn't even get published until September. Much respect all around. I only wanted to analyze the poem because that's my duty. That's my mission for all of you. I call bullshit on the cliches. I can't help it. It's in my blood. I'm like the truffle pig of cliches. I was bred to sniff out platitudes. So I set to work analyzing the poem. And as it turns out, this is a poem that needs and deserves a very careful read. And I kind of feel ashamed about my initial dismissal and grateful that I came to my senses. I actually, side note, had a similar experience when Beyonce released the Formation video a couple years ago, and I actually talk about that in my upcoming book. Plug for my upcoming book. And just like the Formation video, the more I read and the more I listened, the more awesome shit I found. So I'm asking your forgiveness, and I promise I'm going to make up for my dismissal of Gorman by giving that poem the proper what for over the next 20, maybe 30, maybe 40 minutes. It's a complex poem, y'all. You're going to have to hang with me. But first, just understand where I'm coming from. I spend my life being utterly and totally disappointed by speeches. I love speeches like most people love music. And even better than prose speeches are poetry speeches. Jesse Williams's 2016 BET acceptance speech still blows my mind. But Williams is the exception that proves the rule. Most speeches, even the famous ones, are hot trash cans. There aren't 10 speeches on American Rhetoric's top 100 list of best speeches that I would ever listen to again voluntarily, let alone take the time to analyze closely. So I tend to go into speeches these days with kind of a chip on my shoulder. And I know that's terrible for someone who's supposed to be like, culturally astute and educated, but we all have our filters. And the other thing is that I had originally tuned into Gorman's poem just a touch too late. I missed the first stanza and came in at the second. All right, So let me start at the second. So let me play the second stanza for you now. This is the first one I heard.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is.
You gotta admit, that shit is pretty boring. It was about what I expected, and as tends to happen when something is pretty much what we thought it was going to be, I tuned out a little bit. But when I sat down to analyze what I thought was going to be mostly more of that, it turns out this poem is kind of radical. And more importantly, nobody else has noticed it. Mainstream, which also means like almost always white and liberal leaning, at least the shit I read, those critics have done two things mostly with Gorman's poem. The first, obviously, is to praise it because it delivered the very cliche vision of a post-racial American future that white liberals love to celebrate, as if it's, basically almost done. That is called whitewashing. But then, among the whitewashers and sycophants are a few sharper-eyed critics, like old Melanie McDonough of The Spectator, who wrote a piece titled, Amanda Gorman Was Let Down by a Terrible Poem. So, I'm reading over McDonough's critique, interested to see her reasoning, and I come across this passage. McDonough writes, Amanda was given the theme of America United. The hill we climb is the result. Without pretending to be in the FR and Queenie Levis League when it comes to literary sensibility, I couldn't make sense of it. I mean, I got bits of it. I got the sentiment. I got the stream of consciousness, the emotion. I got the sub-Martin Luther King flow. But trying to make the whole thing cohere structurally and grammatically, and in terms of sense, was another matter. Now, I don't know what FR and Queenie Levis League means, but I do have some strong thoughts about what McDonough wrote now that I've had a chance to read the poem. First of all, I know that just yoking Gorman to MLK is lazy and transparently stereotypical. Their flow isn't even close to the same. Gorman speaks like a millennial, and Dr. King speaks like a turn-of-the-century preacher with like some doo-wop swagger. This lady couldn't think of any other poet, not Angela Davis or Audre Lorde or even Maya Angelou, who actually delivered a poem at the 1993 inauguration. Still incorrect comparisons, but at least would have demonstrated some effort to know, one other Black speaker besides MLK. McDonough then goes on to critique the first stanza of the poem, the stanza that I had originally missed. Also, I might be using stanza wrong here, full disclosure. I looked it up, it seems right. First, I'll play you Gorman, the first stanza. Then I'm going to read you McDonough's read of the stanza. So this is the first bit that comes before the Nation Unfinished bit that we just heard.
And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished.
All right. So about the first two lines, never-ending shade and sea we must wade, McDonough writes, quote, how does the loss we carry, a sea we must wade, follow from the first line about finding light unless it's simply to make wade rhyme with shade? And then about the line, we brave the belly of the beast, McDonough just writes, like E-H, So I'm reading McDonough's critique, and I'm listening to Gorman again, and reading and listening, and I realize the we that Gorman is using, it's like not the we of the Constitution's we the people. It's not we the way Biden's inauguration means like we. And that's why McDonough doesn't get it, because she's not in the we. And I'm not either. I'm just fortunate to spend a lot of time reading brilliant Black women who write about brilliant shit. Think about it. Think about the words, right? Finding light, never-ending shade, carrying loss, wading a sea, the belly of the beast. What are those metaphors? Where have you heard them, or maybe not heard them before? It's the middle passage, as in the colonizing human trafficking ring that ran through the Atlantic and stole millions of enslaved Africans to build precisely the we that is meant by the Constitution. The imagery is unmistakable. These turns of phrases are iconic, right? Zora Neale Hurston's Barracoon, Christina Sharp's In the Wake, Manu Erbstein's Amma, Alice Walker's The Temper of My Familiar. So all of these share this common set of language metaphors to communicate this experience. So right in the middle of this poem that seems to be praising the unity of a colonizer country who hasn't really come close to achieving abolition, yet are a radically disrupting set of Middle Passage metaphors that reinsert slavery into the heart of the American project. And if all of this, by the way, is new to you, if you're like, Middle Passage, slavery, what are those things? Those are old, right? I recommend that you read Hannah Nicole Jones's Introduction to the 1619 Project, which I have linked in the show notes and on the blog. Read all of it, but look especially for the part that begins, they say our people were born on the water. Again, our people, not my people, right? Gorman's people. So McDonough is wrong. Gorman's poetry makes perfect sense. Additionally, now that I've paid closer attention to the first stanza, the unity cliches in Gorman's second stanza hit a little different because they're her speaking in a second register to a doubled audience of colonizer and colonized. She hits hard with the first stanza and then softens things up in the second. It allows her to have two audiences at the same time, right? Listen again.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is.
So Alexander Alter, who's a critic for the New York Times, writes that Gorman's poem, quote, spoke of the possibility of unity and reconciliation, and then cites these same 4 lines. And when I wasn't paying much attention, that's about where I wound up as well, originally. Except I'm not a fucking New York Times critic. Going back now, I can see what both Alter and I overlooked, the repetition of the word somehow. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed. And if you're thinking about a generic, which is to say white audience, then the word somehow is kind of like, OMG, somehow we managed to survive Trump and COVID. Thank God for Instagram, LOL, right? Like somehow is kind of in that vein. But if you're thinking Middle Passage, the stolen people of African and their enslaved descendants, and they're enslaved by other named descendants, then you think about the word somehow in terms of survival, as in somehow I escaped. Somehow I managed to survive the trip across the Middle Passage. Somehow I kept the heat on when I couldn't pay my bills, right? The register of somehow changes. And because it is repeated twice at the beginning of each line, somehow would be classified in this speech as the rhetorical figure anaphora. Anaphora gets used a lot. And, in fact, you may have noticed, my astute little rhetoric nerds, that Gorman has used it before. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, right? We've. Anaphora is a rhetorical device that helps draw attention to the situatedness of the content. And when it's used well, it's supposed to draw your attention to something being slightly out of place, to you needing to think about how the second word isn't exactly like the first word, isn't exactly like the third word, even though they are materially on paper the same word. Sometimes anaphora is just like lazy. Whenever I tell my students, like, pick a rhetorical device, they always pick anaphora because then they can just say cheesy shit like, we must come together, we must win, we must prevail. Like the bane, and for that reason, the bane of my existence is halftime speeches in sports movies. They always make this move, with the exception of the Rocky, see how many hits you can take. To Stallone's credit, he does not make that move. But that would be lazy anaphora. Gorman's anaphora is much more subtle, much more cunning. And whether she knows it or not, I'm hoping this was all done on purpose, but it's always hard to say. She repeated we've, as in we have, twice, in order to signal, without explicitly saying so, that the we is not the generic we of we the people that gets thrown around. Gorman is speaking to 2 different but inseparable we's, at least 2. She's speaking to the colonizers, and she's speaking to the colonized. We are all the we, but we are also not all the we, right? I know, it's so trippy. So the repetition of somehow is a double down, because there's a somehow for the white hegemonic we of privilege, and then there's a different somehow for the non-white we of oppression. Gorman is for sure uniting, like she is for sure unifying. We are all part of the we. The we who survived gaslighting for 4 years. The we who hope this administration brings some relief. The we who have suffered under COVID, right? But we don't all suffer equally, do we? There is a differential distribution of injury. We have all been injured, but the distribution of that impact is not equal. It separates a we into multiple different we's. There is the we who deals with police corruption and shitty treatment. I'm not part of that we. And there is the we who can't see red lights flashing without wondering if they're going to fucking get home alive. That's not my we. Somehow, right? Gorman's somehow is a gap. It's a challenge. It's an impossibility that Gorman presents to disrupt an otherwise naive and giddy vision of the perfected American dream. Somehow is a disruption to an easy solution. And it's meant to invite the listener to consider how exactly somehow comes to pass, and how your somehow is not everyone else's somehow, right? This is how we come to take responsibility for slavery as a collective we, and not just, isn't it unfortunate that some people went through that shit a long time ago? So then Gorman delivers her third stanza, and this is the one that really breaks the bank. We, the successors of a country and a time. It's absolutely brilliant. Listen to the third stanza.
We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
And if this seems like, why do I keep repeating this? It's because this is the work, right? Listening over and over and over again is the work. And that's the last stanza, by the way. I'm not going to do the whole poem. There's no time. So here's what McDonough had to say about this passage. Quote, "This is a weird sentence. You get the gist, of course, but where does the we that begins the line go in search of a verb? If the sentence began with a skinny black girl, ... can dream of becoming president only to find herself, it could sort of work. But following on from the we, the successors, it doesn't. Sorry." End of passage. I love the addition of sorry there. If McDonough had a better eye for style, it would read sorry, not sorry, because that is what the word sorry is actually saying. McDonough's grammar policing entirely misses the point that poetry is meant to violate, and speech, speeches do this, is meant to violate grammar for the sake of producing meaning, new meaning. Thank you, Gertrude Stein. And I'll answer the question. I'm going to answer the question, right? Where does the we that begins the line go in search of a verb? The verb that McDonough is looking for is the verb your word processor would suggest if you typed out this line. Grammatically, we, as in the subjects of an English grammar that is always colonizing, want the line to read, we are the successors. Or we want the line to read, we the successors are, or we the successors should, or something like that. And that is what McDonough means when she asks, but where does the we that begins the line go in search of a verb? How ironic that McDonough, who personifies language here to make a point, can find so much poetic creativity to mock the poem, but can't then flip that creativity to analyze the poem. Because Gorman is not starting a new argument about who we are. The point is precisely that we is in search of its verb. Think about it. You're part of the we. I'm part of the we. We're the we of the people. We're the we of the Biden electorate, maybe, or maybe you're a moderate. I don't know. You're certainly not part of we the Trumpers, or you wouldn't listen to me. We're the we of this new world of equity and reconciliation and anti-racism. But we're also not the we, are we? Because we are still complicit in making apologies for police brutality or systemic injustice or privatized prisons or disgusting health disparities between people of color and white people. And I'm not shaming you. I'm not better than you. And also, not all of you or we are equally complicit in the we. But on a general level, for the most part, Gorman is standing on a stage next to Kamala Harris, trying to peddle the feel-good unity that is demanded of her at the moment, for good reason, and also she's got to be painfully aware that this is all a hot crock pot of simmering bullshit, right? She's got conflicting desires. So she leaves the we in search of its verb, which is a poet's way of saying, oh, you love unity? Oh, yeah? Then what the fuck are you doing about it? I'm paraphrasing here. I don't think Gorman would ever go there. She's finishing the anaphora she started earlier. She repeated we've, as in we have, to disequalize the we, to disunify the we, so she could carve out a space to speak to the experience of the descendants of the Middle Passage who are in one breath told that they are part of the we, and then shown every day that they most certainly are not. The we is still in search of its verb. All right. So we have covered the first 2 words of stanza 3. Let's cover the first 5 words. Listen to it again.
We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
Think about the word successors. What are successors? They're the people who take the place of. A successor is not a descendant. A descendant comes after. Gorman uses both of those words, very close to one another, to make sure that you know that they are not the same thing. Kamala Harris is Mike Pence's successor, but I sure as hope she's not his descendant, as in of his political lineage, because descendant doesn't only mean like biologically descended from, right? Gorman is descended from enslaved people, meaning that she comes after and also carries them with. She doesn't replace, but she isn't entirely made anew either. And that echoes back to the earlier stanza about the Middle Passage and the collective memory that Gorman and the rest of the descendants of enslaved Africans carry with them. Now, we're getting into some very thorny territory here. Intergenerational trauma, water memory. There's no consensus on how any of this stuff works or how it affects people in the present. But let's just say this, all right? If you think slavery is dead and gone, and we're all just like living in the emancipated present, you are mistaken. And maybe like in serious denial, I don't know, of how systemic violence works. The point of the poem is to try to change your mind about this in ways that sort of go in through the back door of your consciousness. That's always what poetry has done. So we understand that Gorman is a descendant. That part makes sense. But how are, quote, we the successors of a country and time where Gorman is speaking? How can you be the successor of your own moment? Well, in your modern cause and effect brain, you can't. Your English grammar brain wants this sentence to say, we are the successors of the legacy of slavery, so to speak. That's what you think she's saying because that's how grammar colonizes your sense of logic. But she's not saying that. She's saying, we the successors of this moment are in search of our verb. Let me Doc Brown this for a second. We're in the present, right? Where Gorman is, spitting lines. And we want this present moment to be distinct from the past, where, slavery was. Even those of us who subscribe to modern abolition and the like, there is still this huge part of us that's like, well, it's not exactly the same. But, let me ask you this, who fucking cares? What's even the benefit of drawing the line between past and present? What does it get you? It gets you an alibi. Because slavery was really bad, and private juvenile detention to prison pipelines that overwhelmingly incarcerate black men are, not as bad. We've got to let go of the separation. And that's what the poem is trying to do. It's trying to mess with your cause-effect brain to give you another way of seeing the connection between past and present. I do not, frankly, care about the differences between present and past. I care about the similarities. And for us to seriously get on a visceral must-do-some-shit-now level, as the we of the we the people, that whatever, quote, used to happen, slavery is still going on, means the distinction between past and present has got to get very, very confusing, to the point that it isn't even useful anymore. I'm not saying erase history, and I'm not saying that everything is just the ongoing eternal now and blah, blah, blah. I'm saying that if you go to the past to talk about what was and then go there because it informs radical anti-racist action in the future, great. But if you go to the past to start contrasting it to the present because it makes the present more bearable, stop. Stop right there. Think about it this way. I used to shit my pants. We all did. I don't shit my pants anymore. But I do procrastinate doing my work and paying my bills. Now, if I go to my past to understand how me being told not to show my shit to the world may be affecting my consciousness about bills now so that I can adult better, great. But if I go back to the past to be like, well, I don't shit my pants anymore, so shopping online when my bank account is in the red is definitely an improvement, stop, right? Stop right there. But Gorman can't say all of that. Also, she don't want to, right? It's not her genre. She can't do it on the occasion. Her theme is unity. It's not rant about the Middle Passage, and she can't do it in her genre. She's constrained. So she does something just as good, if not better. She uses poetry to mess with your sense of time and cause and effect. You, the successor of this moment, where is your verb? How are you the successor of yourself now? And then Gorman drops the best line of the piece, only to find herself reciting for one. One more time, just listen. Just listen to it one more time. It's so good.
We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
Dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. The word only kind of just like slips in there. It's just like a little bit of shade, you know, as in, oh, you only got me blah, blah for my birthday? Only is a division between the verb dream, as in dreaming of the American dream, the fantasy, the aspiration, and the verb reciting, as in rote learning, obedience, formality, total lack of deviation, right? When you say somebody recited something, you're not like giving them any credit for anything new. Gorman's line about reciting for the president is not a vision of unity or harmony or healing. It is a cutting commentary on the gap that still exists in our language and our systems between the feel-good notion of upward mobility for Black women and their reality as bound subjects of power. Black women remain subjects who must recite power to have any power, even though the power of the reciter is never the power of the subject who originates the lines to be recited. Gorman's lines remind us that the blackened body, as Zakiya Amon-Jackson has termed it, is so saturated by systemic racism and anti-Black violence that no amount of fame or fortune modulates markers of disease and illness. This is scientifically proven. Not that science is like the end-all be-all. It did a lot of fucked up shit. I'm just saying, I'm not like making this stuff up. Another Black woman poet, Audre Lorde, testifies in a book she wrote called The Cancer Journals about the myth of upward mobility for Black women. She reflects on her breast cancer diagnosis, and the iconic figure remarks with neither irony nor surprise that none of her successes could improve the so-called health markers that the medical field, another institution of systemic racism, thrusts upon her. Mainstream critics love to praise Lorde as a great, parentheses Black, parentheses woman poet. What they often don't mention is that Lorde died at just 58 from terminal breast cancer, and more importantly, that her odds of survival would have dramatically improved had she been white. And speaking of critics who love to praise Black women poets but manage to completely not listen to what they're saying, let's finish our tour of whitewashing with Dwight Garner of The Critic's Notebook, also from the New York Times. First, Garner opens his treatment with a list of a bunch of poets, right? And writes, "It hardly matters that the hill we climb is not an eternal work of art. ... In cadences that fell somewhere between those of Lauryn Hill and Angelou herself, Maya Angelou, Gorman rose to meet a moment." Okay, first of all, "it hardly matters that the hill we climb is not an eternal work of art" is an obnoxious way of saying this poem wasn't that good because it was just kind of like nice in the moment, right? That is a pretty vapid argument for a person with a New York Times column called The Critic's Notebook. But hey, at least this guy knows who Lauryn Hill and Maya Angelou are. Still kind of a weak comparison, but better than just like pulling out Dr. King again. And then Garner goes on to write. This is a long quote, so hang with me. After 4 years during which language was debased, I assume he means Trump administration, when it meant anything at all, Gorman offered a fortifying tablespoon of American plain-spokenness. She offered lucidity and euphony. Her hand motions were expressive, as if she were conducting an orchestra of one. Dwight, dude, are we even reading the same poem? Fortifying tablespoon of American plain-spokenness? Maybe Black American double-spokenness. And lucidity? I think by that he means clarity, which is like one definition of the word. It also doesn't apply here. His poem's hardly clear. If he means lucid, as in bright, as in shining a bright light on the double standard of the American dream without triggering backlash from swaths of white America, Gorman is as lucid as they come. I don't think that's what he means either, though. An orchestra of one very much misses Gorman's split of We the People. That's all over this poem. There's no orchestra of one. It would be better to say that Gorman is conducting two very large orchestras at the same time, one of which doesn't know that the other orchestra is playing. Now, to close, there are some excellent reviews of Gorman's poems by women of color that get more to the heart of the contradiction I'm pointing out here. But they aren't close readings, they don't pay attention to the moves. It's kind of a general impression. And I'm also running out of time. However, I have linked them for you in the show notes. You should read them. It's Ashley Jones for CNN Opinion and Kadish Morris for The Guardian Opinion. I will just kind of wrap up what they're saying, what I'm saying, what Gorman is saying, not saying. When Black women speak, right? Let's start giving them credit for their willingness to disrupt the platitudes of language that lubricate the well-oiled machines of oppression. Let's stop rewarding and praising them for being subjects of recitation. Gorman's poem, which I didn't originally do, but I'm doing now, should be taken seriously and critiqued as a revolutionary statement of disruption, rather than praised as yet another example of a Black woman who made America feel better. Thank you so much for being an ally in the fight against cliches. Look for new episodes of Rhetorically Speaking dropping every other Tuesday. And help other rhetoric nerds find the show with a shout out on social media or, good old word of mouth.